Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And what an exciting story we have now. And we're on part 2 of it today. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with part 2 of the story. I believe the baby is a gift of God. We can't possibly abandon it. Of course I'm not suggesting a termination. Are you mad? I'm completely against abortion. I always have been. I could see the relief on Fabian's face. As much like myself, abortion was not a word he could easily entertain, especially when it came to his own progeny. That's not where I'm going with this, Fabian. I have another much more practical solution that will be better for the both of us long term. Please don't get mad with me, Fabian. Hear me out, won't you? I'd never get mad at you, Fee. You know that. We're in this together. We're a team. I want us to give our baby up for adoption, Fabian. I know this isn't what you want to hear. I've been thinking of this decision long and hard. And it really is the best for our baby. We're not financially, emotionally, or even physically equipped to care for a baby, are we? Not at this time in our lives. We may really love each other, but is love enough? People always say it is. But a baby is so much responsibility, and I just don't believe that we're in a position to care for one properly. I understand where you're going with this, but we don't need to take the adoption route. It really isn't that necessary, Fee. I know my mother would look after our baby for us. I know she wouldn't mind. Indeed, I think she'd consider it a great honour to look after her grandchild. And if it's a girl, she'll be over the moon about it. I told you, there was never an Annie Augustus in our lives, but she'd have liked there to have been. And now our little baby, well, she'll be delighted to look after her. You can't ask her to do that, I said. You just can't. It wouldn't be right. It just wouldn't. But why not? Because we can't ask your mother to do that, I said resolutely. I don't want your family, or my family for that matter, knowing anything about our baby. If my mother knew I was pregnant, in my unmarried state, she would be so gutted, so desperately disappointed in me. I don't have the heart to let her know about any of this. That's not a problem. We can rectify it at once. We get married then. Then everybody will be happy. It's not about being married, Fabian. I wish it was that easy, but it's not. It's so much more than that. Even if we were to get married, it changes absolutely nothing. In the grand scheme of things, we're too young to become parents, are we not? We're both embarking on degrees at university. This is not the right time for the both of us to become parents. Surely even you can realise that. Finally, after many lengthy discussions with Fabian, he came around to my way of thinking, but very reluctantly, I have to say. Yes, I did love him. Yes, in the future after university we could finally get married. Yes, we could have other children, but now was not the right time. And if we gave up our baby for adoption, we'd make sure she went to a great home and encourage the baby in later life to get in touch with us, when he or she, and we believed it was a she, was older, so that we could reconnect with our child again. And it was those words that I think made Fabian finally see the light. Little did I know that our decision to give our baby up for adoption was invariably sealing our fate. My little girl was born at Edinburgh's Royal Infirmary Hospital on the 23rd of April. I had persuaded the nurse that the moment my baby girl was born, that she must take her away from me and hand her over to the agency straight away, who would give my baby to the American couple who were adopting her. Please, I begged her, even if I protest, you have to take her away from me. Don't you let me see my little girl. You can't let me see her. And don't let my boyfriend Fabian see her either. It's very important you listen to me on this. Even if I beg you to see her, you absolutely have to refuse me. But are you sure you want me to do that? The nurse had asked. Don't you at least want to hold your wee bairn in your arms for the very first time? You've been carrying her in your womb for over 9 months. Don't you want to see her bonny little face and say hello to your beautiful girl that you gave birth to?" "I'm sure," I said. "I know if I see her face, I just won't be able to part with her. And the woman who's going to adopt her doesn't need her heart broken again. I don't want to do that to her. She's already had a surrogate mother letting her down. I don't want to do the same cruel thing to her. I know all my common sense and good intentions will blow out of the window at once the moment I lay eyes on my little girl. It's like someone giving me a crumble of chocolate cake and then refusing me an entire piece. Only so much more worse than that. Besides, I've signed some legal documents where I've committed myself to handing over my baby. And I can't backtrack on my promises now. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be fair." The nurse nodded sympathetically, as if she understood. "Well, I will do as you say. But I must warn you, this is going to be extremely hard on you. Most mothers are very desirous to see their bairn after it's born, even if they are putting it up for adoption." "I don't trust myself to do that. I'm impressed that other mothers can do that, but that's not me. I'm not strong enough to turn my back on my baby once I lay eyes on her. I know exactly what I'm like. My baby isn't born yet, and I already love her to bits. And I really already want to keep her. And I'm not in a good place to be the best mother for her. She deserves so much better in her life than what I can give her at the current moment. And this American couple that are adopting her will give her an enviable lifestyle, and I want that for my little girl." "It sounds to me as if you have it all figured out. But it also sounds as if you don't want to give up your baby," said the nurse kindly. "It's like you're wrestling with your own emotions, are you not? Are you sure there isn't another way you can keep your wee little bairn? Could your parents not raise her while you're still studying? Giving up a baby is a very big deal for a mother, you know. Believe me, it's going to be an emotional roller coaster ride for you, and I'm sure you may one day live to regret your decision. I know many mothers do." "You may be right about that, but please do as I say. I'm begging you." "Very well," said the nurse. "If you insist, I will do as you say. But just so you know, I'm not remotely comfortable about this. I do think it's very good for a mother to bond with her baby, even if she has to be parted with it. But, given you feel so strongly about this matter, I will do exactly as you say." When my little girl was born, and my boyfriend Fabian was sitting at my side, holding my hand, and I heard the first cry from my baby, I couldn't bear it. Please can I see her?" I asked the nurse. "You told me not to show your bairn to you," said the nurse, leaving the ward with the baby in her arms. "You've had a beautiful baby girl, 6 pounds 7 ounces, but I'm doing exactly as you asked me to do." I could see how painful it was for Fabian not to see our baby, but we had both firmly decided it was for the best. But we both regretted giving her up for adoption from the very moment she was born. It was like there was something missing in our lives, a void we could not fill, as if we'd experienced a bereavement of some kind, and a heavy loss, and I even told Fabian as much. "I should have listened to you. We could have got your mother to look after our baby. What have we done? I've been such a wretched fool. I never even got to see the baby's face. What kind of a mother does that make me?" Fabian rocked me very gently in his arms. He brushed his lips against my forehead. "Don't be so hard on yourself, Fee. We've discussed this at great length, have we not? We will have children some day, and God willing, when our girl is older, she'll look us up, and she will always be considered part of our family." "You really think she'll look us up one day?" I asked Fabian hopefully. "You really think so?" "Oh, I'm in no doubt she will," he said confidently. 8 years later, I was now a happily married woman. I was living in Dublin with my husband Fabian, and we both had successful jobs in the city, and were making a reasonably good living. I was working at an agency, where I was in charge of creating holiday packages for the rich who were keen to visit the Emerald Isle, and wanted to see what Ireland had to offer. If a client was exclusive and willing to pay the highest rates, I would often volunteer my services and take them on some of these outdoor excursions myself. So in my job I had the best of both worlds. I could be sitting behind a desk organising holiday packages for people, or if the price was right, even supervise some of these trips for the rich clients, who usually came from abroad and wanted to see other attractions that the average tourist in Ireland might not be privy to seeing. I loved my job very much, but I enjoyed it more when I was interactive with my clients and would supervise some of these trips. And when that happened, I was often away from home for several days. But it meant when I returned to Dublin, I appreciated being home with Fabian all the more. At this time of my life, I'd finally confided in my mother about the baby I'd given up for adoption, and as can be expected, she was devastated to hear the news. But I knew I couldn't keep the secret from her any longer, because I was bursting to tell her about it. I wanted her to know that somewhere out there she did actually have a grandchild. "You mean you and Fabian had a baby girl while you were a student in Edinburgh? And you mean to tell me you gave her up for adoption? How could you do that, Fee? This is my granddaughter we're talking about. This is very distressing news. It really is. I honestly don't know what to say. I can't believe you could part with your baby girl. I could never imagine ever giving you up after you were born. The idea doesn't even bear thinking about." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, Mum. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret my decision. If I could go back in time and do things differently, with the benefit of hindsight, I would almost certainly do that. But it's too late for all those regrets. I couldn't tell you, Mum. I know your views on sex before marriage, and I knew you'd be so disappointed in me if you knew your little girl had not been as squeaky clean as you hoped." "Oh, for goodness sake, Fiona, listen to yourself. I might be old-fashioned, and yes, in an ideal world I'd love my daughter to be a virgin when she walks down the aisle. But I had to be realistic, didn't I? I knew that would never happen for you, even before you left for university. I know I couldn't keep you contained in a bubble, and believe it or not, I do know what happens out there in the big wide world, especially in this current rather promiscuous generation. Young girls fall pregnant all the time. It's not ideal, of course it's not. But people will manage to make it work. They make a plan, don't they?" "You really think like that, Mum?"
"Oh, don't look so surprised, love. Of course I do. Despite what you may believe, I'm not a prehistoric dinosaur that is so desperately out of touch with the modern world. I may seem rather formidable, but I'm not. When I was a girl, many young women my age had buns in the oven before they actually got married. It was a lot more common than you may think. It happened to my best friend Catty, so I know about the turmoil she went through. But in the end she kept the baby, got married, and all was well. And now she can't imagine what her life would ever have been like without her beloved son. Sometimes when a baby comes into your life, it's not a convenient time. But then again, when is it ever convenient to have a baby, I ask you? I'm just extremely upset that you didn't think you could confide in me or reach out to me or your father for help. We'd have loved to help and support you in that situation. I'm your mother, for goodness sake, Fee. You should realize that I'm here for you no matter what. You should have known beyond a shadow of a doubt that me and your father would have been more than happy to raise the wee little Ben for you. But you didn't even think to ask us, or even give us the chance. And now we may never get to know our precious grandchild. And that's very upsetting, Fee. How I wish you could have shared all this with me. It must have been such a tumultuous, very challenging time for you, going through this all on your own, being pregnant and that, as a broke student. I wish you would realize this, Fee. You could never disappoint me, love. You and your brother Gabriel make me enormously proud. It disillusions me greatly that I never got to see my grandchild. Tell me, who adopted her? I hope you made absolutely certain she went to a loving home. At least if I can know that, I can sleep peacefully at night.
I don't know the name of the couple. The agency didn't disclose that kind of information. But I do know the couple that adopted my girl were American and very wealthy. At the time they adopted her, they were living in Ireland for a couple of years, but then they returned to America. They live in Boston, in a wealthy neighborhood there. They had been trying so hard to have a baby at the time. I seem to remember the agency said the woman had had over 8 miscarriages. The couple was so desperate. In the end, they hired a woman to be a surrogate mother for them. But the woman kept the baby. She refused to give it over to them, so they were absolutely demolished by that. The agency assured me they were a very nice couple, and that I could be extremely confident that my daughter would have a great life. My mother let out a whistle.
America? Goodness gracious me! That's a long way from home. A long way.
Well, Mum, the great news is I did leave a letter for my daughter to get in touch with us when she got older, if she wanted to connect with her birth family. In the letter I told her that for me and Fabian, giving her up for adoption was not an easy decision to make, and that if she wanted to connect with us one day in the future, we would be delighted to hear from her, so that she could be reunited with her biological family.
You think she'll do that?
My mother asked cynically. But I don't see why not, Mum. Surely she'd want to know where she came from, and about her Irish roots, or whether she had any brothers or sisters. I know in her shoes I'd want to know things like that. Wouldn't you?
Yes, I think you may be right. I think I would want to know. Everybody needs to know their roots. Tell me, does Fabian's parents know about this? The baby, I mean.
I made a face. Absolutely not, Mum. You must never tell them. Fabian's mother would never ever forgive him. He desperately wanted his mother to look after our baby for us, but I point blank refused. Oh, don't look at me like that, Mum. Please don't look at me like that.
Look at you like what, love?
With that funny face you pull when you don't agree with me about something. I know exactly what you're thinking, Mum. There isn't a day that doesn't go by that I'm reminded of what a prize idiot I am, to turn back on help that I could have received that would have changed my life and Fabian's life. But I couldn't help myself. I just couldn't. I think I was too proud at the time.
Honestly, love, what on earth were you thinking? You had the quintessential opportunity to keep your baby, and you allowed perfect strangers, living in a country far, far away from Ireland, to raise your child, when you could have kept your child if you'd only reached out for help. Things could have been so different for you and Fabian. What do they say? Pride always comes before a fall.
Tears spilled down my cheeks. Mum, don't you think I know that already? I hate myself for what I did. I was such a prize idiot. A day doesn't go by when I don't regret my decision. My mother took me lovingly into her arms and patted my back with one of her hands, as I buried my face in her shoulders and sobbed uncontrollably. It really was good to get out all my pent-up emotions. She began to rock me like a baby.
There, don't get so upset, Fee. I'm so sorry to have been so caustic with you. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. That's the last thing I'd ever want to do. You and your brother Gabriel are the most precious, most beloved things in my entire life. I hope you know that. It's just this has been an awful shock to me, and learning I have a grandchild out there in America that I may never get to see in my entire lifetime is very tough for me to digest. But don't blame yourself, love. You were young and naive at the time. It may have only been 8 years ago, but you've grown up an awful lot since then. You're a married woman, are you not? And you're married to a wonderful man. You couldn't ask for a better husband than Fabian. You live in a lovely apartment in Dublin. And you're so successful in the travel business. I'm incredibly proud of you. Me and your father are delighted you've been so successful. You help rich folk plan their holidays here, and you supervise some of those trips yourself. Besides, when push comes to shove, we have all done things in our lives we regret. One of the things about life, Fee, is we learn from our mistakes, don't we?
I bet you've never made a mistake in your entire life, Mum. You've always been so level-headed, so much more sensible than I am.
Oh, you better believe I've made mistakes, Fee, said my mother. I've made a zillion mistakes in my lifetime, I'll have you know. And by the grace of God, I can't remember them all. And I'm grateful for that. I ran away from home once when I was 13 years old, with my brother Hilton. So yes, I've done some ridiculously foolish things in my time.
At this, my mouth practically dropped to the ground. But you never told me this, Mum.
Because, love, there are some things I'm not proud of. And when you're not proud about something, you don't exactly discuss it very much. You try and pretend it never happened.
But you ran away from home when you were 13. But why would you do that?
Because my mother was a punctilious, punctilious, well-ordered woman who liked things to be just so-so. She had a dazzling chandelier that hung from the ceiling in the hallway. It was an absolute stunner. I would always admire it. Every time people visited our house, they would be completely bedazzled by the shining chandelier that had belonged to my great-great-grandmother. My mother claimed it was her most precious possession that she owned, and I took her at her word. So did my brother. We both believed she loved that chandelier a lot more than she loved us. One day me and my brother were playing with a ball in the hallway, and I'm afraid to say the ball went crashing straight into the ceiling, and the chandelier came tumbling down with a mighty crash, and there was crystal flying everywhere, like falling pieces of shrapnel in a war zone. Goodness gracious me, it was a dreadful mess. Me and my brother were in such a sizable panic. We were very scared we'd get into loads of trouble with my mother about breaking her most precious possession and leaving a huge, ugly, gaping hole behind in the ceiling as a consequence. We decided the only thing to do was to run away from home. We were so desperately afraid about how angry my mother would become with us. Little did we know that chandelier had become dangerously unhinged, so that the ball we had been playing with in the hallway had brought it down prematurely, but it was going to fall down any time soon. We might have actually protected someone from a terrible accident. The ceiling was disintegrating because of all the rising damp. Quite frankly, it's amazing it never hit one of us.
So where did you run away to? I asked my mother.
Well, me and my brother Hilton, we hitched a lift from a stranger. We walked for miles and miles around the Irish countryside for the next couple of days and nights. We ended up sleeping in an old rusty caravan in a farmer's field of sheep. We were so miserable. We were hungry and cold, and it rained non-stop. We were snapping at each other like turtles. Soon we returned home with our tails between our legs because we could stand it no longer. We were expecting to get into huge trouble with my mother, but we were met with hugs and kisses and tears. My mother was so pleased to see the both of us. The whole town had been looking for us, and they feared we'd been abducted by some nasty stranger. My mother thought something really bad had happened to us. She gave no thought for the broken chandelier. That was the very least of her concerns. That really surprised us. I think then we realized that maybe in my mother's eyes we were much more precious than that chandelier of hers.
What happened to the chandelier?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I'm afraid I don't know. I never did see it again. But yes, I have regrets in my life. That's what I'm trying to tell you, love. If I'd told my mother that the broken chandelier was an accident, she would have been mad, of course she would have been. But she would have forgiven us very easily, especially when she discovered that that the chandelier was actually disintegrating before her very eyes. I imagine if someone came to look at the ceiling, they'd have told her as much. So in the same breath, I would have easily overlooked your not being married and being pregnant at the same time, Fee. That's what I'm trying to say. My focus would have been more on the wee bairn you were carrying in your womb, rather than, whether it was right or not that you were pregnant. Sometimes we need to face our storms rather than run away from them. That's all I'm saying, Fee. Running and hiding, well, it's a bad idea.
My mother's story resonated with me. I blamed myself for being such a fool all those years ago. But at least I knew that Fabian and I would be able to soon start a family and have plenty more children. We talked about little else, where we would live, how many kids we'd actually have between us, and so forth. And then one day Fabian came home and kept saying he had the horrible sense that someone was following him around and that he was being stalked. "What do you mean someone's following you around?" I asked, looking perturbed.
"I know this sounds nonsensical, but I've been seeing this man, Fee, in my peripheral vision. He's wearing a beige trench coat, bowler hat, and he's got a moustache. When I turn around to have a closer look at him, he manages to slip away, but I know he's there. He's watching me for some reason. In the beginning I doubted what I was seeing, but I know I'm being followed by this man. The other day driving home I saw him in the car directly behind me. It had no license plates on it."
"Are you sure you're being followed?"
"Well, I don't really know, do I?" said Fabian, furrowing his brow. "But I'm pretty sure I am being followed, and that's good enough for me. The other day, the woman that works in reception, you know, the attractive woman with the blonde hair, she always wears those zooty round glasses over her eyes. She sends my clients up to my offices for meetings. I'm always forgetting her name."
"Oh, you mean Marty? Of course I know her. I can't believe you forget people's names so easily, Fabian. That's not good. She's a lovely lady. What is it about her?"
"Well, she claimed that a man fitting a similar description to the man that I know has been following me around, who was wearing a trench coat, happened to have a moustache and a bowler hat, had come into the reception the other day, and was asking all kinds of questions about me. He was asking specifically if a Fabian Augustus worked there. She told him, yes, he does. Would you like to make an appointment with him? He said no, it wouldn't be necessary. He was a solicitor looking me up. He just needed to know that I was the right person he was looking for, because I was the sole beneficiary of a substantial family inheritance of some kind from a long-lost relative. He wanted to check that he could send his official letters to the business address where I worked. Of course, I checked with my parents about all this. They don't know any distant relative of ours with a sizable inheritance that passed away. So they don't believe this man that was making inquiries about me was a genuine solicitor, as why was he clandestinely following me around?
You're right. If he was authentic, he'd come straight up to you and speak to you, wouldn't he, about the matter, not hide in the shadows like this. It makes no sense at all. Why would anybody follow you around, Fabian? It's seriously creepy.
It beats me, said Fabian, raising a brow. I've tried to rack my brains as to why someone would stalk me, unless, of course, it's a matter of mistaken identity, which is always a possibility.
But it can't be a matter of mistaken identity, because Marty told you the man came to her in reception and asked if you happened to be Fabian Augustus. And I bet there are not many Fabian Augustuses out there.
True enough. You make a good point, said Fabian, shrugging his shoulders nonchalantly. But despite his carefree gestures, I knew he was very troubled.
Did Marty give you more information about this man?
Well, she said he asked if I was married to a Fiona Augustus, who worked at an agency organising holidays. And she said you've got the right man. Fabian is married to Fiona, and yes, she does work for that travel agency that you're talking about.
The man asked about me, and he knew my maiden name as well, I asked incredulously.
I'm afraid he did.
And you're saying that Marty just willingly gives out my private information and your private information? What is she thinking? She should know better than that.
Well, she said when he was claimed to be a solicitor, and looking me up in regards to a long-lost inheritance, she became extremely excited for me. So that was why she answered his questions.
So you're saying she answered his questions and he just walks away like that? Did she even ask for any ID?
I'm afraid she didn't. She does regret that.
As you can imagine, my husband's story really unsettled me. I couldn't comprehend who could be following him around like this. It all seemed very nefarious to me. And then I was being mentioned in the discussion as well. And this person, whoever they were, even knew my maiden name. It was all very strange. One day an exceedingly bizarre thing happened. A woman arrived at my husband's offices, claiming she needed to see my husband about an important legal matter that needed his immediate undivided attention. The woman seemed to possess a heavy French accent, which was so exaggerated that Marty in reception thought it might have been put on, but she couldn't be sure about that. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, was heavily made up, with Marilyn Monroe-style makeup. Her eyes were so blue that Marty thought she might have been wearing contact lenses. Then she was wearing a very bright red lipstick. The woman claimed she needed to see Fabian about an important matter and that it couldn't possibly wait because it was extremely urgent. Marty asked the woman who she was, and she said her name was Sophia Bonfieux, and that the nature of her business was both personal and private. Marty described the elegant woman as very sophisticated, wearing what looked to be like an expensive Armani business suit that she believed must have cost a fortune. She also appeared to be wearing a mink coat, but Marty believed it wasn't real, but it was a very expensive fake. She was wearing elegant leather gloves on her hands, which wasn't terribly unusual, as it was a freezing day in winter, so she thought nothing more of the matter. Marty immediately called through to my husband's office and said there's a Sophia Bonfieux that wishes to see you, about a very urgent matter. My husband told Marty to send her up, and Marty told the woman to take the escalator to the 12th floor and to go to the office on the far left. The woman left the offices and thanked Marty for help once she had finished with her meeting with my husband. She gave Marty a very fake smile and scurried away. Later that day, when Marty rang through to my husband's office to inform him about the arrival of another client of his, who was scheduled for a pre-arranged meeting with my husband, after getting no response from him, she personally took the lift to the 12th floor herself and went into his office to find out what was going on. She found him slumped over his desk, and in his hand he was holding a tiny box that contained a couple of pieces of vanilla fudge. They discovered my husband was deceased. He was out cold and had been so for a few hours. It was assumed he had experienced a fatal heart attack. But an autopsy was performed which revealed that my husband's manner of death was by no means a natural one. Detective Murray Crawford was put in charge of the investigation. I answered the door to him in a dreadful state. I sensed there was more to my husband's demise than meets the eye, and it turned out I was absolutely right about this. But nothing prepared me for what Detective Murray Crawford would actually tell me.
"How are you doing, Mrs. Augustus?"
he inquired of me. He was a very jolly man, in his early 50s, with a receding hairline, olive skin, and very big brown eyes that were full of compassion. "As well as can be expected, Detective," I told him. "I'm sorry, but as I was saying to you on the phone, I don't believe for a second that Fabian suffered a heart attack. I just don't. I told you as much on the phone. Fabian told me days before his death he was being followed around by a strange man, with a moustache and a trench coat. Something weird is going on here, Detective. I'm sorry, but Fabian was so healthy, far too healthy to die so young." The detective studied me through his kind brown eyes, in which I discerned some genuine compassion.
"I'm sorry I didn't take your concerns very seriously, Mrs. Augustus. I genuinely thought your husband had suffered from a heart attack. But it appears I was wrong. Sometimes heart attacks can happen in young healthy people, you know. But it is very unusual, and definitely warrants investigation. Therefore it was exceedingly important that an autopsy was performed on your husband. The medical examiner did all manner of tests on him. I'm afraid, Mrs. Augustus, I don't know how to tell you this, but your worst fears have been confirmed, I'm afraid. It does seem your husband's death was a lot more nefarious than we could have ever imagined, which is why I'm here to shed light on the matter. Your husband's death has been turned into a murder investigation, Mrs. Augustus."
"What? My husband was murdered? Are you joking? He was murdered?"
"I'm afraid so, Mrs. Augustus."
I had believed my husband's death was highly suspicious. Of course I had. But even I had never gone so far as to believe his death could lead to a murder inquiry. I felt as if I was playing a part on Murder, She Wrote, or something like that. It all seemed so surreal, as if the story of my life was now a draft in a writer's script for a crime thriller novel.
I'm afraid so, Mrs. Augustus. I know this is not what you want to hear, and it's not what I want to tell you. I will say the medical examiner was extremely shocked by her findings, and is adamant that someone wanted your husband dead. That is very, very apparent.
I began to shake like a leaf, as I stared at the detective with bewildered eyes that grew rounder and rounder by the second, as I tried to fully assimilate the gravity of what Detective Murray was actually telling me. I knew my husband had not had a heart attack, but murder. This took what had happened to him, to my husband I mean, to a whole new level. But I don't understand. Who would want to murder Fabian? It makes no sense to me, Detective. Fabian was such a gentle soul. He didn't have an enemy in the entire world. Everybody loved him.
Ma'am, I can see you're very upset. How about I make you a cup of tea?
Here in Ireland, when you're upset about something, everybody puts the kettle on to make tea. We all believe a sweet cup of tea can iron away much of a trouble. I led the detective into the kitchen, while I watched him make me tea, as he rattled around with cups and saucers, while I stared vacantly into space, as I tried to continue to assimilate the gravity of what he'd been telling me. My husband had been murdered. Finally, the detective handed me my sweet tea, which I took with shaking hands that were trembling so much, most of the tea was spilling over the cup, into the saucer, and onto the floor. But the detective ignored it, and so did I. So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good